If you just do it, it'll turn out okay. Hey, everyone. Welcome to Talking Time with Caffeine, the podcast where we do whatever we want within reason and talk about it. Just kidding. But anyways, with me, is one of the stars of today's debate, RJ, and the star of my very first after show, Eric.
Eric Beerthar 92, and I also go by Eric the Tyrannoceratops on YouTube. So if you want all my young Earth creationism content or my science content, go to Eric the Tyrannoceratops. But if you want all my movie content, you would have to go to my primary channel, which is Eric Beerthar 92.
Oh, and Kenny has announced that the Ark was found. Sorry, Kenny. Nope.
But yeah, Kenny. So it's actually very interesting by the fact that you said that during this after show, because that's exactly what the debate was about in the first place.
Oh, by the way,
how did you think we did?
So I actually
you did great. The other guy, not so much. Sorry. Yeah, from what I saw, what's the debate? If I go to the bathroom at the very end, the air. You're asking for evidence of his claims. He says, "I can't give it. It's a top secret, government secret, or something like that."
Yeah, he's proceeding in an unusual way because, of course, he's not a young Earth creationist. So all of the usual arguments that you would be presenting for the flood, he isn't trying to do. Instead, he's presenting a weird amalgam. Partly it relates to the archaeological stuff. People lived in their area. They lived in Anatolia. They lived in the Caucasus. There's a whole bunch of archaeological evidence, which I think he's misrepresenting, that supposedly there are no settlements. There's no indication of that. Yeah, I really, even one from what I've encountered already for my research for the volume 2 of The Rocks Were There, has a whole bunch of stuff on the paleoarchaeology of the period. But what he's doing is arguing that because there has been a turnover and a shift and a spread of particular pottery styles, that somehow is a documentation for the flood without actually offering any evidence that there was a flood, which would be drowned villages, dead bodies, deposits of things connected up together, which he skipped completely. And I tried desperately to get him to focus on a particular point, and I picked India precisely because he had mentioned Harappa culture in earlier interactions that popped up when he's done debates, and I bumped into him. And so the Harappa culture, the Indus Valley culture, which dates back many thousands of years and then kind of started fizzling out right around this period, 2200 BC. But it doesn't have a catastrophic cause in the way he wants. He needs to connect it to the flood. And it's clear he don't have no ammo. I mean, when you're prodded on a particular technical point and you're being invited to do that, anybody that's knowledgeable is going to jump on you with their primary source material because they want to show off. And he ain't doing that because he knows diddly about it.
And it is very interesting by the fact that you had that debate with somebody, as far as my understanding goes, you went up against two people. One of them was not a young Earth creationist. It's because normally creationists who will debate Noah's Ark usually are of the young Earth
the same community, and he's got this cockamamie notion that somehow or other all this water came out and made an ice age. Well, when I asked him repeatedly to clarify, to explain, and one of the questioners asked him to explain it in a clear, concise what his model is, He couldn't do it. He would just go rambling on with the same material, going back to William Buckland back in the 1700s. It's all. I don't know how familiar you are with the history of the formation of geology and Buckland and Cuvier and Lyell and all of that. He's presenting a caricature of what was going on. I'll give you a short summary of the thing that there were two basic ideas about how the geology worked in the days just before modern geology was founded. One of which was diluvialists that thought flood, not necessarily the global flood or a local flood, but it usually fell into that area. And then there's the Plutonists that were arguing that it was kind of volcanic material that was going up. And the idea that Lyell, I'll have to look up whether Lyell was really dealing with anything in relation to any ice ages in India, because I made a great point of bringing up all of that. That's all the wrong period. And it doesn't matter what poor Lyell thought in 1850 about the subject. It's 2021, and there's a gigantic amount of geological data.
Right, yeah. And the thing is, science has advanced and it has moved on so much since then, and I've noticed that with a lot of creationists, they will bring up all these quotes from Charles Darwin and all these quotes from all these scientists from centuries ago. It's why should that matter anymore? It's because scientists have moved on ever since then. New data has come around, and and this last semester that I had, I took a lot of geology, and so even
it's a busy field, isn't it?
It is, and especially with me wanting to get into paleontology, of course, I'm gonna have to know geology, and so even before then, I already knew that there was no geological evidence for a worldwide flood, but after taking the course. The course says, I took physical geology and geology lab. It became even more transparent why there never ever was a worldwide flood.
Yeah. And poor Philip, if he's thinking there's going to be some paradigm shift ever on this point, that the geological community is going to go, well, shucks, you were right.
Yeah, and about that, so one of my geology tutors, he actually told me, but by the fact that he knew a young Earth creationist who said that granite is not an igneous rock. And when he said that, the whole geologic community was scratching at their heads, what are you talking about?
Yeah, I alluded to my Spokane area, and you'll notice I asked both Tangelo. I think I managed to ask Tangelo, but definitely Phil, what's the flood layer where you live? And he just said, well, there's this clay there. And I would love to see his detailed monograph explaining the geology of that area from a flood deposit with source citations. Suppose he may be sending me his book. I gave him my mailing address to send that to. I don't plan on shelling out money for it. And if he does send it to me, I will be delighted to do a source analysis on it. That'll go right in the queue after I'm finished with the Replacing Darwin book of Jensen. That would be the next one down the road, because that pushes into a completely different area. I tried looking at the Amazon posting of it, and there are quite a few excerpts that were available, but none of them with any science content. It was all basically theology stuff. There was no menu that could allow you to text search, which some of the postings at Amazon will allow you to do that, and therefore you can check to see what, even though you can't see the text directly, you can see what page it fell on in the listings. Can't do that. So there was no way to measure what topics he was bringing up. But from what I could see from the excerpts, he's not presenting an argument that's persuading much of anybody. I think he name dropped a couple archaeologists. And what I think is the case, and that's why I stressed asking him whether or not he had presented his model to them. Because what I think is he's flipping around with these archaeologists, and they're looking at the material and indicating that there's been migrations in the area. And he would say, "Ooh, there's been migrations. Yeah, wink, wink, nudge, nudge." And they go, "Yeah, that's right." And he has baggage that he's not sharing with them. that if he ever actually stood up and said to them, oh, by the way, I think that migration is taking place when a gigantic global flood took place from waters coming up, and that all of that and all the animal distribution is coming post-flood, then he might not get so much agreement from them. And so I'm going to have to go searching Sheila and the other archaeologists to find out what material they publish. I may already have some of this in my bibliography because I've been doing a pile of research for Rocks Were There Volume 2, where we're going into all of the animal distribution and cultural variations, and what the idea that there was just a single moment when there was disruption. And then this notion about a prehistoric violence. Yeah, human beings have been violent all through our history, and it gets up and down in various times. But the kind of super violent world that is painted in the Bible story doesn't match up with the archaeology. And I'd love to see whether or not his book ever offers any evidence for that. I'll pause for breath now.
I gotta say the debate seems pretty much like in wrestling terms, like a handicap match. It was you and Jordan mainly being on Philip a lot, and he never hardly ever tagged Otangelo in at all.
When Otangelo was in potted plant mode all the way through it, I mean, my God, this he was completely out of his depth. And given that, I did think there were some really nice admissions going on. Otangelo flat out acknowledges that from his reading of the creationist literature, which I by no means think is staggeringly comprehensive, but at any rate, that none of it is very persuasive to him that they have accounted for a post-flood dispersal. And I added the proviso, the reason being is because the model's wrong, and they're never going to make it fit.
Yeah, hasn't that rock thing and not ever had been like discussed for like decades now? Like I remember.
Oh yeah, that
in the 90s.
It's ironic that the picture that was shown, and I should have mentioned this, but I've neglected to in the debate. The picture that was the promo bit for the debate related to this rock formation that was being touted for years as the flood thing, and it's been obliterated. Lawrence Collins has done a lot of material on it. That's not really what he's claiming as the ark. He somehow thinks the ark landed on Ararat, and that it got broken up in something after that. And pieces of it then are wedged down in this crevasse, which is the thing that he was showing the pictures of. That's as far as I can get. And I don't think it's ever going to be much more detailed than that. Interesting spot, if it's actually legitimate old material, which of course there's all of this accusations that it's not. Otangelo has researched it, and he doesn't believe the fraud thing. Well, Otangelo is not the most rigorous researcher on the planet, so I don't know that he would have the skills to be able to do that. But I would love to be able to see the technical documentation that he is presenting, both on the extinction of mammals, the supposed diffusion of culture. Has he forgotten there's an Americas? Has he forgotten that there's Asia, Australia, the rest of Africa? I think he's all tunnel visioning in, for what little I can see of it and what he was saying today, on just that area that's around Mount Ararat and Anatolia and into the Caucasus and all of that. There's a whole bunch of prehistory going on there. I've encountered the term the linear armband something or other stuff. That's one of the pottery styles that exists, and they can trace stuff that way.
Well, if
none of that matches his model.
If it was a local flood, perhaps maybe even that could have happened, even local animals. But since they admit they have to admit it's a worldwide flood, and they get all these answers.
And to do that in an old Earth creationist is really gutsy.
So, and so, I actually have met like a few old Earth creationists who actually do believe in a worldwide flood, which is surprising because that
what do they argue happened?
Say what? Sorry.
What did they argue happened? Because I can't think offhand of ones. None of the Fazal Rana types in that.
I used to be.
What are they claiming?
No, I used to be one of them. I used to be an older creationist in the flood. Don't anymore, obviously.
But what was in your head then, Lamont, as what you envisaged happening in a global flood, and when was it happening?
Well, it had to, in my mind, it had to happen before the land bridge of North America 10,000 years ago. So I'm like, so it had to happen before that. Because I know, like, I was like, wait a minute, how could the flood be 4,000 years ago if the land bridge crossed 10,000 years ago? I'm like, I'm like, obviously it happened before then.
That's and also, and I believe that even R. Raw did a video on, I believe, how mythology disproves the worldwide flood. It was about how, like, he was listing all, like, these, like, cities and civilians, like that were around during, you know, when the flood, like, supposedly happened.
Egypt.
Yeah. And
they are the worst.
So it's like, okay, well, if there was a global flood 4,000 years ago, well, then how did Egypt, you know, like, somehow, like, not know about it?
Well, and that's why the young Earth creationists, at least, are honest revisionists. I've been waiting, because I'm an old fart. I remember back before this became an obvious problem for them, because none of the old Earth creationists, your Dwayne Gish, Henry Morris era, none of them are archaeologists, none of them are Egyptologists. This was just completely divorced from their worldview. They're chemists and hydraulic engineers and biochemists and things like that, not archaeologists. But I knew that the Egyptian chronology straddles the flood, particularly the Pyramid Age straddles the flood, and therefore they're going to have to move it. And so you've got a small bunch of modern creationists. I think his last name is Don, or something like that. And he has a postings at AIG and others that in just the last few years have been trying to jump on the revisionism bandwagon. And because the archaeology has expanded so much to where there's a whole culture of Egypt going back into pre-dynastic times, functionally they've got to put rollers under not only the Pyramid Age, but the entire Egyptian chronology, so that all of Egyptian history and prehistory is occurring post-flood. And that's a tall order, because by the time you get down into the Amarna letters and that in the New Kingdom, they're interacting with the other cultures in the area on a level that makes it very difficult to do the calibration without a lot of shell games. And this is an old tradition. Emmanuel Velikovsky used to be doing that back in the 1950s. So it's a cottage industry around there. And that's because the traditional, I'm going to geek out now on chronology here. But the traditional dating for the flood in that 6,000 year framework was 1500 BC. I mean, for the Exodus, I should say. And the flood then around 2350. And the problem is that all the biblical scholarship in the last 100 years has recognized that the Exodus actually refers to the New Kingdom period, if it took place at all. And that's around 1200 BC, which is like 300 years later. So there's this mismatch between the traditionalists, and the young Earth creationists are all still pretty much traditionalists, and the modern types that you would find if you were going over in Fazal Rana land or intelligent design land. They're okay with the 1200 BCE Exodus time, but not so the young Earth creationists. Meanwhile, this fog bank of chronology, 4 to 2300 BC for the world in Williams's framework, and yet no attempt to connect up the dots. The megafauna didn't get extinct 2300 BC. This was thousands of years earlier, and they can actually trace the big culprits here are the arrival of human beings. And that's 40,000 years ago for the Australia. It's 15 to 20,000 years ago for the Americas. You've got a tracking thing, none of which can be compressed into a tiny time frame, which is what he wants. Oh, so how much of a fraud is Otangelo Grasso's buddy? That's an interesting methods question that I personally think he's totally sincere, that he believes everything that he's got. He's got this little model of his, and that's why I would be able to tell this if I eventually have access to his book. Because I could start seeing how he makes an argument and what evidence does he think to cite for it, and where is he staying away from the implications of things not being a problem. I think all of his interactions with the archaeologists has been as he's advertised. He's just leaving out the context that he's not clearly explaining to them what his position is. And the thing supposedly he wrote to Martin Rudwick, the historian of geology. And it sounds exactly like Rudwick gets a letter from a creationist crank, and you write a response letter that's really polite saying, what an interesting suggestion you have. I strongly recommend that you conduct some research on this. Thank you, yours truly, Martin Rudwick. P.S. Please don't ever contact me again. There will be lawsuits. Maybe he left out the P.S. part. But you find exactly that context when people email or write a famous scientists to get their position on here. Oh, and we got Walking Fish Walker.
Hello, how's it going?
Hey,
Did you see the debate?
I did. I thought it was a great debate. I thought it was interesting. You know,
Yeah,
of course, I thought you
left
and
most of the
Jordan
heavy
both did
lifting
really well.
to Jordan, and then I kind of hovered in the background to drop some of my anvils on India and some of the other side issues.
Well, Phil did most of the heavy lifting, the talking for the other side anyway. So you know.
Yeah,
Oh,
D'Angelo didn't say much at all.
This is the second time Otangelo has been a potted plant. When he was in his debate with David Neff with Williams, and that I'm sorry for poor David, 1 against 2, but in a way not, because Otangelo was irrelevant. So it was he just put forward the little video that he showed again this time, and other than that, he just sat back and let Williams spiel his spiel, and so literally his entire argument is what you get in that video.
Yeah, I remember at the beginning of the debate, he accused you guys of being YC or something because you talked about YC.
Well, that was a weird part of the debate.
Yeah, it's because we were dumping young Earth creationism on him. That the fact is that the young, it's part of his mythology that somehow or other, this finding a Noah's Ark that dates to 2350 BC, somehow on Mount Ararat, is somehow a problem for young Earth creationists who believe that the ark landed on Mount Ararat in 2350 BC. This is not an argument. I can't see why he's built this mythology around him. That there's a reason other than the fact that the various creationists involved, who have every incentive to accept this evidence, don't accept it. And it's across the board. And the other ones, the older creationists and the intelligent designers, don't pay any attention to it. And there's really been very little criticism of it, even from the regular geological community, because it's kind of below the radar. I'm sure most of them sit back and go, why do we need to even get involved when he is having problems persuading Andrew Snelling and Carl Whelan that he's right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I thought that was a really interesting... I don't know, like he sort of just waved away y'all's opening just by saying like, oh, well, all those people are young Earth creationists, I don't accept them as sources. Yeah. Which, like, I guess fair enough, I think that's valid if you don't want to accept Snelling as an
which
authority.
is why I then tried to press him on what evidence is he offering. And you will have noticed in that entire exchange, we didn't get diddly on the geology that supported his argument.
Okay, yeah.
I've done sorry, man. You can go ahead.
Oh, no. You go ahead first.
Okay, so for the research I have done, like on Andrew Snelling, he is a very unreliable source. Like he fabricates a lot of his claims and whatnot. And so yeah, he's not a reliable source at all. And so since I didn't watch the debate, I just want to know, did your opponent try to give any geological evidence, like, or anything like that? And especially after when I took geology, I am pretty well versed, like, on geology. So,
yeah, he is not a geologist and offered no geological. His entire argument is scriptural plus pottery.
Yep.
That because people made pottery and neighbors around Ararat copied a lot of that pottery in that period, that somehow or other that confirms this giant dispersal. And then when you jump to the rest of the world, his entire argument rests on the extinction of megafauna after the Ice Age. That's supposedly taking place during the flood, for which he offered absolutely zero evidence. And then of course, he just gave me a delightful opportunity because he brought up Julius Caesar and tried to argue that you can't really prove the existence of Julius Caesar. Well, Roman history was one of my areas in college, and I was just ready to go, oh, really?
Oh, really? And so, when he tried to use pottery, that's pretty much the same logic like that, as some young Earth creationists say, like when they say, oh, well, here's the Ica stones, it's pottery, depicting dinosaurs and whatnot.
His argument is like proving the Piccadilly Circus existed, and the Charing Cross station existed, means that Harry Potter is true.
Wow.
Eric, you haven't seen the debate, but like if you already take an intro geology, something that I think was interesting that you kind of hinted at is you kind of implied that geologists have just misidentified all of the glacial deposits in the Pleistocene as glaciers, and he's like, no, they're actually flood deposits, which was really funny. He kept
deposits.
Yeah, no, he said that all glacial deposits from the Pleistocene were actually flood deposits, or at least that's what I interpreted.
And not only that, he tried to argue that the ice age that took place in India, which is Silurian, back when it was in the southern hemisphere 200 million years ago, was Pleistocene.
Yep. And
so much ignorance.
Well, so the way he kind of weaseled out. I don't want to call him weasel. Like I said, he seems like a nice guy.
I call it weaseling.
Yeah. So the way he got out of like actually substantiating anything he made in geology is he just kept saying like, "Oh, well, you see, there's no literature out there right now because I'm implementing a paradigm shift."
It's my different paradigm.
And the whole idea behind a paradigm shift is that one paradigm is favored over another because it explains the data better.
Yeah.
You can't just say, okay, I've come up with these things. This is a new paradigm, right? Like what data does it explain better? Because it sure as hell doesn't explain like glacial geology better.
Yeah,
right.
And that's why I really wanted to get that India in. We didn't even get to the other parts, which are the Deccan Traps volcanic deposits in India, which of course is way after Silurian Ice Age that's at the tip of Africa. And even before the Deccan Traps, there is another bunch of volcanic deposits on the east side of India that shows the deflection that was taking place where India was before it got to the middle of the Indian Ocean during the Cretaceous. And so there's a long history of this stuff.
Yeah, from what I heard, he's saying, like he was saying, I can't tell you, it's all top secret.
Yeah. I, as a scholar, was particularly annoyed. He's trying to use the dodge that I can't write any scholarly paper about these archaeological finds because it's all under wraps and I would be sued and it's not. You can cite already existing archaeological work. There's a huge body of it. The idea that you can't present a hypothesis and discuss this matter is positive claptrap. And I think this is, a rationalization dodge on his part as to why he isn't going much farther than just that little book that he wrote.
Mm-hmm. And so there was one time on Facebook a few months ago, I got into like a Facebook debate with a young Earth creationist, and and I was trying to explain to them the geological evidence, that is against a global flood. I was trying to point out, is the fact that we have igneous rocks is a huge problem for the global flood. And then this YEC was trying to say, oh well, that's not a problem for the global flood. I'm like, yeah, it is. It's because
interbedded volcanic ash. I have been keeping track, probably longer than you've been alive, Eric, of the various examples of interbedded volcanic ash in the geologic column. And one thing I want everyone to keep an eye out for as a little tester thing, often a technical paper in geology won't mention, even in the abstract, anything about airborne volcanic ash. Where you find out about a lot of this stuff is look in the stratigraphy chart to see what the deposits are in detail. And that's when you'll see aeolian, which is windblown, you'll see volcanic ash, interbedded stuff, and particularly if the area is in a region where there was volcanism and mountain building in a particular geological period, odds are that there's going to be examples of pyroclastic flows, and that's another one to Google, is pyroclastic flows. And you will discover that those are spread all through the thing. But one of the mythologies of young Earth creationism is there was one ice age, post-flood, just one. And therefore, they have to interpret either every scrap of data that is ice age related as all taking place in this post-flood period, like 22,000 BC, around in that range-ish, they're very vague, or that it's not really an ice age thing, that it's something else that just looks like the striations that you get in drop erratic boulders and all these other little fiddly bits that go on. And that ain't going to cut it. And then along comes Williams with this hilarious cartoon version of a global flood and ice age that doesn't have evidence for either one of them that he can present, except pottery and the mammoths and the megafauna went extinct.
Yeah, I gotta admit that's pretty bad sources to try to argue for a flood. Pottery.
Yeah. Pottery.
Well, so
Pottery.
and he also said something about like mass graves or something of humans.
Oh yeah,
And-
yeah. Here's his argument. He imagines that these various megalithic burial sites that we find, and we find burial sites, in fact, going back tens of thousands, 20,000, 30,000, 40,000, 50,000 years. I mean, there's a lot of different things as cultures. The king drops dead, you bury it. And if you're a nomadic culture, all of the things you would normally be doing are ephemera. If they're anything that they're using with wood, we know, for example, that people were making wooden shit a lot. And yet, let's move forward into the Christian period. There's a whole area of Russia where they've got a particularly peculiar area that preserves wood, unbelievably good. And it's been a gold mine of research in Russia since at least the 1970s, as far as I know. And the reason why it pops up in my brain is because I collect chess history. And most of what we know about what Russian chess sets of the 1100 period look like are because there's all these leftover chess pieces and plates and bowls and crap that's wood never deteriorated because they were in this weird local environment that didn't degrade all of that stuff. Does this mean nobody was making wooden chess sets 200 years earlier or later, or that they weren't using spoons and wooden bowls because we don't have the material for it? Because of the context. So that's why I would be really anxious to get my hands on his little book, to be able to go in and analyze in detail what exactly does he offer as evidence, how much of it's recent scholarship and how much of it is old 19th century crap, like the Buckland material.
I mean, if tonight's show was any, I guess, forewarning, I guess, from what you're going to find in the book, there's probably not going to be much empirical data in the first place.
Yeah, I doubt that. Hi, Lisa. Lisa shows up on my show a lot. Yes.
Hey, are we talking about Otangelo?
Otangelo was a potted plant on tonight's debate, as he was in the previous debate that he and Williams had with David Neff. He basically sits back. I have not researched anything on the subject. Here's the video that Williams presents, and away we go. And that's as far as it goes.
Mm-hmm.
The most interesting part of the show was in the question and answer period, when we had a chance and various people, audience members and others, were asking Otangelo questions about the flood and evidence of things. And he was actually quite honest in admitting how crappy the evidential frame was on biogeography and all of that stuff. But it was, I think one thing that was nice about it is, even though it's a controversial area and we're dealing with two ideologues, it was a really cordial debate, a discussion. We were all calm and serene and pleasant with one another. And I got muted a couple times because I wanted to talk about the damn geology. But other than that, it was no ballistic things.
Okay,
Yeah,
so here's the thing, if you're going to go into a debate about a particular topic, you should do research on it, prior. That just blows my mind by the fact that people will go into a debate saying, oh, well, I haven't done some research, but, right, here's a video. It's like,
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah,
It's like, what do you agree?
I asked him, and someone in the Q&A asked him explicitly to explain in like a couple sentences what his model was. And he couldn't do it. He would just start digressing, and you could just see the paragraphs from his book materializing in his mind as he was repeating this big, long narrative about Buckland and Lyle and the night. No, excuse me. If you can't explain what you think happened, if I wanted to say what the Big Bang was or the KT extinction, you can describe it in a couple sentences because you understand it. If you can't describe it that way, it's probably because you don't actually understand it, but you think you do.
Yeah, Otangelo, gets a lot on the Raging Atheists live streams, and he like links a whole lot of papers, and it really makes me angry because
Oh yeah.
he's like, he wants us to figure out what his argument is, but yet he doesn't have an argument.
I've
You know
still
what I
got
mean?
a video of his that he put up a ways back, which is just a vomit of authority quotes from people saying how wonderful God is and how science proves gods and all that. Nobel Prize winners, dissidents of evolution. And I've only gone down through it part ways because I have a lot of other projects in mind, but I propose to track all of it down. That he's misrepresenting their positions and way far removed from the data field. Normally, a Tangelo, his big bugbear is origins or bust, the origin of life. And in any area, he will just go on and on and on. There are email exchanges that I've been observing occasionally that are unbelievably boring, in that he would put these long discursive emails with these masses that would go on for pages and pages of authority quotes of people, some of which date back to the 1970s and stuff. Like, this is supposed to mean anything. All of this is crap he's culled from the anti-evolution literature. It is really boring.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I think
and in the live chat before the debate started, they're talking about how it's been found, and some guys said that the lava preserved it. I'm like, how could the lava preserve a wooden ship? Wouldn't it burn it up?
Exactly. Like, what kind of argument is that? It's like, do you even know what lava is? It burns. And like, and that reminds me. So when I took my geology course, so my professor was showing all this footage, all these people, taking selfies in front of lava coming towards them, and it's like, it's common sense. Lava is hot.
Ironically, Mount Ararat is quite an old volcanic area. And what's so interesting about it is that some of it was formed back when the TTwC was in operation, back before the modern times when India collided with Asia. And so there's pillow lava on Mount Ararat that indicates that that stuff was actually at sea level when it was originally formed. And of course, volcanic pimples can form and unform over a remarkably simple period of time. The fact that it hasn't eroded away indicates that it's a fairly, I think it's classified as a dormant volcano. I don't think it's an extinct one. And those things can go through a lot of different bits. But the mythology that this is an area where young Earth creationists and Williams match up. They all think that human migrations, I guess, are all taking place, and animal migrations are taking place after the flood, lickety split. And there's no evidence that that's going to connect up with stuff. And that's why I'm anxious to see his book, to be able to see what stuff is he relying on for these things. Because they've got the genetics now. You have dozens, at least, if not hundreds, of modern humans and Neanderthals and archaic humans going back 500,000 years, and a lot of that more recent material you can get full DNA sampling from. And so they're able to dig at graves that are like 10,000 years old and do haplotypes, and they can trace the lineages as to how people are moving into areas and when all that's happening, and they're leaving debris and grave goods and all this other stuff. And I bet he hasn't touched more than a tiny fraction of that in his documentation.
Well, speaking of animals, it's bad enough they said all the modern animals were on the ark, but when they add on all the extinct animals, like what? Did they just get on the ark? God put on the ark just to them to die off right afterwards?
And because he is an older creationist, he doesn't try to argue that. So he's not talking dinosaurs on Noah's Ark, but he is talking kangaroos on Noah's Ark. And so, and he basically flat out, when asked how did they manage to make it from tortoises to the Galapagos and all the rest, he put up a little thing about floating islands and other kinds of things, but then basically said God made it happen. Well, that's the get out of jail free card.
Debunk says, Otangelo often shows his knowledge in informatics. You know what? I always ask him, always, define information. He never does that.
Yeah, I'll do a
Never.
shameless plug for The Rocks Were There. Jackson and I repeatedly discussed the creationist failure, and it extends over into intelligent design land, to work out what the hell they mean by information. And my go-to example on this are the ALUs in our genome. I can never remember what the hell the acronym stands for, but they're a little retrotransposon, and I don't think they're very long. I think they're only a few hundred or a thousand or so.
Yeah,
They're not very. They're quite short, but they have basically a copy me signal. So once they're in your genome, they copy and copy and copy and copy and copy. And by copy, I mean copy. 1.4 million of them in the human genome at the moment, of which the vast majority don't do a damn thing. And in fact, is usually dangerous when once in a while that front end of the code, which says, don't pay any attention to me, don't read me, I'm not readable, I'm nothing, will mutate into a start codon, in which case the genome now says, oh, I'm supposed to read this. And at that point, usually it glitches up proteins, it causes diseases. It's a real terrible mess in the dozens or so examples that I found of that kind of thing. But in one case, some of these mutations actually plopped into an area which by happenstance in our brain were useful. And so there's a whole bunch of dynamics that are going on in our little primate human brains that are drawing on old ALU retrotransposons that have inveigled themselves into the system, and by not being dangerous but being beneficial, are still being used. But the vast majority of them are still doing absolutely nothing. I ask every anti-evolutionist, are any of the ALUs in our genome deliberately designed to be there? And if so, what's that telling you about the designer? And I get crickets every damn time. They don't think about it.
That's very, very telling. And so, going back to the kangaroo thing, I do remember one time, I believe Ken Ham wrote an article on Answers in Genesis, giving one of the most I don't remember if it was Ken Ham or somebody from AIG wrote an article trying to do mental gymnastics, trying to explain like how the kangaroos got
He
to know.
thinks they caught a ride on the volcanoes.
Oh,
Yeah.
that one was the CMI bunch, and that got disappeared in a hurry. That was around 2009. They haven't repeated that one
was
since.
absurd. You know, the fact that they got rides on a volcano. And
Wait, what happened here?
Oh, yeah, we're not making this up. There was a guy at
we're
CMI,
not making this crap up.
and I can't remember the guy's name, and he took this up, and it immediately became a what? And it immediately got dropped, although there's a discussion group on it. I think even that has been now deleted. But anyway, his idea was the koala bears, particularly, might have been hurled from the Ararat area to Australia in volcanic ejecta. What could go wrong with this scenario?
What?
You can just see I had the image of the little koala face.
You know, I almost wish there was someone who still took that seriously, because I just find that amazing.
But yeah, it's just that it sounds like something right off of like a Looney Tunes cartoon. It's that absurd.
Mm-hmm. Well, if you want cartoons, and we're going to be going into that in Volume 2 of The Rocks Were There, is all this bit that Kurt Wise has about his gigantic floating forests, that he's way beyond just a little island, a little debris of stuff that's maybe 30 meters long or less. It's got a tangle of crap and a bunch of little organisms in there, and that those can drift. Tiny little marsupials or little rats or insects and snakes and other stuff that could easily disperse. Very rare to do that, but over millions and millions and millions of years, those things can happen. And we can actually see in recent times examples of those sorts of things that occur. And Williams put a little picture up of that very kind of an issue. But that's nowhere near what Kurt Wise is proposing. He thinks that there were giant pre-flood floating forests that then got sloshed in during the flood, plopped down into areas, and baked into coal seams in the catastrophe of the post-flood period.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've seen that in a couple of creationist documentaries, I think.
Yeah.
Was that in Eric Hoven's one, Paradise Lost, or was it in the?
Could be, because he's been channeling a lot of AIG ICR stuff lately. He's said bye-bye to Daddy, although if you look at his website, 90% of it is stuff that was still on Kent Daddy's old website that he's just rearranged his name on it. And once in a while, I found one spot where he had a posting up where Eric talks about his book. It's actually Kent Hovian's book, his dad's. And he hasn't changed the text any. Oops. But disabled the link to it. Disabled the link so you couldn't buy it.
Okay,
Speaking of Daddy Hovind, this was a long time ago. This is before he went to jail, before he went to prison. He still does the spiel, though, the magnum opus of his life. You know, still claiming
theory.
Still claiming ridiculously that the Grand Canyon is nothing but a breached dam. I'm like, how the hell do you...
Oh, this one is another one that we brought up a little bit in Volume 1 of The Rocks Were There, but we'll be addressing again. Is they're faced with a geological problem with the Grand Canyon, because you've got Precambrian rock at the very bottom, which virtually all creationists accept as created rock, not flood geology. Flood only relates to like fossils. They get into conniption fits when you get up into the post-Cretaceous period as to whether or not any of that's flood or not, and there'd be fist fights that go back and forth. But all the stuff in between must be flood. Okay, you got this big flood slurry coming in Arizona, and it lays down all of this crap. Where's the canyon coming from? So it's somehow got to turn into rock really fast by a process that no creationist has ever identified. Look in vain for Snelling explaining lithification. All you get is the waving Claude Bernald and his stupid stratification experiments. Doesn't explain how it turns into rock. Kent Hovian uses the same thing. He'll take a little jar of sand and shake it around and it forms layers. Yeah. Has any of it turned into rock, Kent? No, none of that's happened. So how did they get the canyon?
I learned this in elementary school. It was obvious. It was Paul Bunyan that did it with the axe. Duh.
There you go. Which is about as plausible. See, there's a big debate that's cooled down quite a lot over the last 20 years as to what the course of the Colorado River was and how much there were paleo canyons before the Grand Canyon and how much of the current Grand Canyon incorporated previous canyons and whether or not those rivers were coming in from a different drainage system because the mountain ranges were all different. This is a complicated paleo puzzle. But the thing is, for a time, there was some suggestions that there could be the drainage system that could have formed a lake to the east of the Grand Canyon and that a breach of that theoretically could spill water downstream and add a little more to the canyon. Nobody in the regular geological community was thinking this was making the whole Buddy Canyon. Well, the problem is creationists seized on this to think that's made the whole canyon. And the problem is now the geology has moved on and they realize there was never any such a lake upstream.
Like a leftover lake from the dinosaur era when the North America had a big sea across of it from it.
I think more like they're imagining a bit more like the Missoula floods, catastrophic flooding that we have up in my neck of the woods, except not with an ice age dam because there was no ice age during that period and there was nothing in that so they were just thinking of an area that got breached. A little more maybe like the Messinian salinity crisis, which is another thing that we go into in Rocks Volume 1, which was the dry down of the Mediterranean Sea, and that we brought up because that directly relates to one of the fundamental flaws in creationist geology is how do you make V-shaped incised canyons? You don't make that with a catastrophic flood. You want to see what a catastrophic flood makes? Steep-walled vertical canyons like we have in the coulees. Because
we lost Audrey.
I heard. So
we lost RJ.
And so, so creationists will say like that, the ice age came after the flood, but I don't understand. Okay, how would a global flood create an ice age?
It wouldn't. It would heat the earth so much that we still wouldn't be able to be on it. I mean, if it was as young as they say it was, okay, and the flood was like 2,400 years ago, it would still be too hot for us to be on.
And that's an old, and with the salt water and whatnot, it would have killed all the sea life. And so when it's funny, like why he sees them say, oh, well, Noah didn't need to bring sea creatures onto the ark. Then I'm like, okay, then how do they survive afterwards?
Yeah, Snelling has, and a few others have argued that somehow or other all the fish, freshwater or saltwater, could tolerate gigantic variations. So the saltwater fish wouldn't die out in the freshwater part, and the freshwater ones would be okay with the temporary saltwater, and they'd be all happy. The problem is, although the reason why some fish can change their range is because they have a wide saltwater variation and tolerance, which, by the way, probably was the case in early tetrapods like Tiktaalik. That all the evidence of their biology suggests that they had a fairly wide salinity thing, which is why they could invade the land ultimately. But you get the idea that all of the fish, or the majority of fish, are that tolerant of variations. And sorry, the evidence doesn't support that. And how did Snelling deal with it? He doesn't.
So what were the fish during the flood, like all salmon or something? They can.
They don't think that far. The only thing they think about less than fish distribution are insects. Oh, they do not want to think about whether there were insects on the ark. Doctrinally, they pretty much deny that.
There definitely were termites.
The bugs do during the flood.
There definitely were termites on the ark. Definitely termites on the ark.
They found a
Yeah,
way.
they made sure of bringing that. And fire
wait a minute. They don't address insects. I mean,
no.
Insects are like the largest
Bingo.
group we have today.
In terms of species, life are arthropods plus asterisks.
Yeah.
Matter of fact, I think that I remember seeing a video from Eric Hoban saying by the fact that Noah didn't need to bring insects into the ark is because the fact that they breathe through their skin and whatnot. And
it's like you just breathe water.
Yeah, sure. Here we go. Yeah, no, there's way too many problems that go on in that area. The reason why they don't think about it is because you have to remember the biblical tradition. The creationists are remarkably conservative and boring. They're basically channeling old 19th and early 20th century apologetics filtered through the lenses of what evidence they want to present. And all of the animals in the Bible, which is the only thing that's going to really concern a scriptural creationist, they mention like farm animals. They mention cows, camels at some point. They mention horses. They mention all sorts of things we're used to, goats and sheep. And that they don't mention chinorynchs, they don't mention lorciferans, they don't go into dragonflies. The only bugs they bump into are like plagues of locusts, and Assyrian flies pop up at one of the things in one of the prophecies. But other than that, they really don't pay a hell of a lot of attention to it. So nothing in their scripture impels them to think about it. And when you get down to the flood model, oh boy, do they really want to plow their way through 600,000 species of beetles and figure out which were on the ark and how many kinds there are? And oh no, that's going to have brain farts.
But yeah,
well, RJ, it's because their book says that knowledge is forbidden. Remember the fruit on the tree of knowledge of good and evil? I don't know why good and evil is even in there. Just say knowledge, for God's sake, because that's what it is.
It's an interesting part of the mythology. Brainbug, of course, is our insect person. He was the very first person when I did a restream with a guest. That was Brainbug. He was my very first victim on that, and it worked out just fine. He knows the bug stuff right up the yin yang. I've tried to look into it precisely because it's highly relevant. There's such an enormously broad range. And something really interesting about insects is they're almost completely extinction proof. The arthropods are so resilient that even the Permian extinction, the insects barely burped. The insects lineages during that they are remarkably durable critters, and that's why they persisted so long. And we look in the phylum listing in the appendix to the book, shameless plug, the rocks are there. You'll find that most all of the phyla are those deuterostomes, or the protostomes. us two pterostomes are like echinoderms and chordates and that's about it. We're a little teeny pimple on the sidebar of protostome biology that has dominated not only the history of life, but also dominates the sheer diversity of organisms.
But yeah, so a few months ago, when I got into that debate on Facebook with that YEC about the worldwide flood, when I was trying to point out by the fact that there would be igneous rocks, would be a problem, they were trying to tell me by the fact that they're not a problem, and then I was trying to point out, okay, if there truly was igneous rocks going on some way, somehow during the global flood, this is what we would see. We would see a worldwide deposit like of pillow basalts. We would see those all over the entire world. But that's just not what we see.
In fact, that's how they can tell. In my neck of the woods, anybody that hasn't seen Nick Zentner's college courses on YouTube, subscribe to it. They are golden. He is one of the most spectacular teachers, and all of his primary courses are available in lecture format, so you can just follow along. And he has a huge thousands of people all over the planet follow him on these things. But anyway, he did a gigantic series, which we're going to be referencing in the new book, on the geology of the Pacific Northwest. And we've got examples of exotic terrains, they're called, TERRANES, that are pieces of ancient volcanic mega plateaus that were formed underwater. We know that because they have pillow lava, just as other areas like the Columbia basalt wasn't formed underwater because it's not pillow lava, it's columnar stuff, and it has a completely different circumstance. And that you can look at the formation of the details, even in that gigantic period that took place over millions of years. Most of the Columbia basalt was what's called the Grand Ronde, the chocolate layer cake, as he describes it, which is super tough. And that's why all of those mega floods in our neck of the woods would carve down these giant coulees through the softer, younger volcanic rock until they hit that damn Grand Ronde. That's the floor of all of these gigantic coulees all through the Pacific Northwest. And I would love to see any creationist try to ferret their way through the intricate mass of geological material that was encountered just in those Zentner lectures and make any sense of that from their flood model. I've been looking. Tim Clary, none of the others have gotten anywhere near discussing all of that stuff.
Yeah, I saw this video either either SciShow or PBS Eons, where they sort of the little quick video about how they know what flood rocks look like.
Yeah, we know what happens in catastrophic flooding, and we know what happens and what it takes to make steep-walled canyons like what we have here. And you can even see this on Mars. There's a thing where there's a catastrophic flood event that some of the creationists have even put postings up on it, where like this helps their argument any, where there was an ancient, long time ago, a water area up on the northern part of the planet that breached a gap and spread out and produced this long, narrow estuary that's typical of a catastrophic flood event. And that's how it works. Not nested canyons with all of these little side branches and stuff, which is what you get in a thing where there's an uplift on one end and the outlet stays the same. And so the land is rising faster than the water can erode it. That's when you get incised canyons. And the same thing happened when the Mediterranean Sea dried up. There's a whole slew of little mini Grand Canyons, in which case the one underneath the Nile was 900 feet deep when the Mediterranean was at its bottom. And it's all been silted up just since the Ice Age. And now you would not know it there, except it was identified by seismics when the Russians were trying to built the big Aswan High Dam back in the 1970s. All of this stuff fits together. And it ain't creation.
A bit off topic, but if the worldwide flood did happen, wouldn't there be a ginormous sandbar somewhere that we could not even get to, because I mean, if every decade or so we have to put the sand back in the ocean, you know.
Well, creationists actually tried to argue that the erosion rate of things precludes an old Earth, forgetting the fact that things change. So, example, the Mississippi Delta, that they can trace that out. None of the rivers on Earth, they come from drainage systems from mountain formations. So there's not going to be many rivers that could possibly be 100 million years old, because of the fact that they would have eroded down completely and disappeared, and the land shifted in the meantime. So what you see, there's an old fellow Playfair's rule, which this was noticed, I think, around 1805, where he noticed how rare big waterfalls are. And that's because those are occurring because geological uplifts have interfered, because water erodes stuff so quickly that eventually it doesn't have a waterfall. It obliterates it. That's, you can see that with the Niagara Falls, that's eroding fast, and eventually it will have obliterated itself. We're just seeing a tiny little snapshot of the few hundred years that we've been able to see the damn thing. But as to where all the silt would be going, if you try to model what a gigantic big slosh event would be, it would be seeing slurries of material all over the planet, and it would be dropping stuff as the water slowly abated that would be in just what we see in a normal flood when it does that kind of thing, but on gigantic scale. And what we wouldn't see is the kind of animal distribution and the sorting and the interbedded volcanic ash and the layers of tiny delicate tracks that are preserved in drying mud, and all the little stuff that occurs over and over and over again in the geologic column. None of that's made any sense, which is why that diluvial model that was kind of the fashionable geology of 1750 fizzled out completely the more geologists actually started studying stuff. And these weren't atheists. Adam Sedgwick was a deeply devout man who was a big anti-Darwinist. He didn't like evolution. In fact, Darwin studied under him, and they would go on geology hikes up into the north of Scotland and all that during his career development. Lyle, who the creationists just loved dumping on, it was actually a theist. He didn't really like the idea of human evolution much, and he had trouble wrapping his brain around the incoming material about Neanderthals and that were just coming in the 1850s when he was doing his late work, and he died, I think, in the 1870s. So he didn't figure in on that. But don't ever rely on a creationist to give you a really accurate history of the development of geology, because most of them don't even know it. And most of them who present the stuff are just channeling stuff that they glommed onto by reading creationist books.
Speaking of geology, Eric, have you learned anything new you didn't know about in your courses that you've been taking lately?
Yes, I did. I learned a heck of a lot. And yeah, I definitely did learn about pillow basalts. And, and like I said, pillow basalts spread throughout actually would be evidence, like, for I would actually would help to support a global flood. I don't think it would fully prove it, though.
It would have been helpful if, for example, if the Columbia basalt had been formed in the flood, as John Woodmarath and Ord insisted in a paper that they had. Why isn't it pillow lava through and through?
Right, exactly. And also even just the fact like that we have like these crossbeds, at crossbeds, those are deposited by wind. Like over time, it'll go in one direction, then over time it'll go into a different direction. That's impossible to have it deposited in a worldwide flood.
Creationists deny aeolian deposits in principle. It all has to be flood, and they go through gymnastics to try to pretend that it is.
Yeah, and also even the fact that we have granite. Granite is an igneous rock, and there's no way that could have been deposited by a worldwide flood. And then one of my geology tutors, happens to be like an older creationist. He was telling me by the fact that he knows of a young Earth creationist who said the absurd assessment that granite is not an igneous rock, although it's really obvious that it is because it was deposited by heat. So it's like if it's not an igneous rock, then what in the world is it?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure either Nephilim Free or Standing for Truth, one of them said something about granite being formed from clay, which is kind of the opposite process of how the real world works.
No, that's the complete opposite. It's deposited by heat, and we know it was deposited by heat. It's because
and you can
silica
even trace the depths of things. Certainly, a lot of it has to do with the little crystals inside of stuff. That is a whole range of circumstances that the individual crystals take. Some of them take a long time to crystallize, and by long, it's short geologically, like 10, 100,000 years, but that's way longer than the young Earth creationist frame. And then, of course, some of them involve unbelievably massive temperature and pressure variations, which, again, if you try to put that in at the top of the Earth during the flood, now you're just talking up more heat. Is all trying to happen at the same time, and this is the one area where creationists just tie themselves into knots, is the fact that all the geological processes generate heat, but that's dissipated over to move a mountain range on a continent is generating energy, and to try to have it all happening in 100 years means all of that stuff is piling up at once, and you start adding up the energy and you're vaporizing the planet. It just won't work.
And so just the fact that Nephilim Free and Standing for Truth
it was one of them. I don't want to make a claim as to which one.
Or
either one could.
Whoever,
Yeah.
or whoever said it. The fact that they said it was deposited by clay, that's flat out impossible. It's because of the silica content, and and it's because of the color of it. Is how So
yeah, green rocks have very distinctive features that come about from particular things.
So and so the deeper down the Earth you go, the hotter it is, and so therefore all the rocks are getting darker, and so it's like granite being formed by clay. That's impossible because of the silica content and with how dark it is. No, that's not true whatsoever. That's the complete opposite. And if it was deposited by clay, wouldn't it be a sedimentary rock instead of an igneous rock?
Yeah.
I don't know.
By the way, regarding Joan of Arc,
I think they're calling it metamorphic, but yeah.
Regarding Joan of Arc being Noah's wife, she also invented arc welding.
Well, going back to the Neanderthals for a minute, and this is kind of sort of off topic, but
no problem.
They've mapped the genome of the Neanderthals,
Yes.
and the Neanderthal genome does not match the Homo sapien genome, and I have yet to see a creationist address that.
Oh, they're forced by their dogma to have Neanderthals part of the human species.
Mm-hmm.
So they somehow or other have to downplay all of that. The problem is the genetics has moved on here, the developmental biology. We have infant baby Neanderthals in graves and the like, to where you can actually see the tooth eruption patterns, the suture patterns as to how the skull is constructing. And you put that together with the genomes, that the old notion that was being bandied around maybe 2000, that Neanderthals might have been a subspecies of humans, that's been blown to smithereens by the last 20 years of research. And there is no disagreement that I can see in the paleoanthropology world that Neanderthals are a separate species and split off a couple 100,000 years before ours did. And exactly the circumstances, and they had a very spectacularly long run. I mean, we're talking about 500,000 years.
Neanderthals are a weird thing. They split off from us, but not so far enough that we couldn't still interbreed with them.
Exactly.
Well, so there was actually very likely some limited interbreeding going on. So I actually, I had a whole debate on this topic.
Only a few hundred interbreeding episodes would have accounted for all the introgressions that we can see in humans over the course of tens of thousands.
I think only Homo sapien women could mate with Neanderthal men. I don't think it was.
That's unclear. We don't know.
Question.
We don't know who was boinking whom. Was it some consensual or non-consensual thing? Was some human or Neanderthal seeing one of the females or males from the opposite sex, and the hots ensue, and away they go one afternoon because there was nothing else to do, or what? We don't know enough about that, and it's still unclear what impact this has on the little. There was a bunch of interesting little breeding episodes, because I think some are occurring in Spain, and there are other areas in the Caucasus region and stuff, which is almost a stone's throw from where Williams's art crap is going on, except the time frame is way earlier.
So there's a lot of open questions as to like how the introgression happened. We do know that at least with the archaic early modern humans, it could have gone both ways, because we do know that Neanderthals we found Neanderthals with human line, right? They're not actually ancestral to us, but human line, Y chromosomes and mitochondrial DNA. But we've never found Neanderthal Y chromosomal DNA in humans, which is kind of interesting. And also, we do know, at least with the modern human DNA, I guess, and the late surviving Neanderthal Y chromosomes, there were some missense mutations and a couple of nonsense mutations across the two different chromosomes that likely could have affected reproduction. It's still a very open question, especially with how the mitochondrial and Y chromosomal
the more mysterious
replacements
Denisovans, for which we have a still very sparse paleontological record. And then the mystery third group. There's apparently genetic evidence that I've seen that there was another group of hominids lurking around somewhere or other that has contributed some genetics to our lineage, for which we have no clue about their paleontology, because they've never shown up as a distinct species.
And
I'm pretty confident Homo erectus.
And weren't the
Homo ancestors?
Weren't the Denovians more related to the Neanderthals than to us too?
That's another interesting thing. So the proto-Neanderthals that we have from like Cima de los Huesos, their mitochondrial genomes and their Y chromosomal DNA all align them with the Denisovans, right? But because there was some sort of mitochondrial replacement that happened midway through the Neanderthal evolution, or actually pretty early in the Neanderthal evolution, their Y chromosomal and mitochondrial DNA would align them with us, but they share more in common with Denisovans for autosomal DNA. So it's an interesting, like, very bushy branch, just because how closely related all these species are.
Aren't Denisovans mainly found in Asia?
Yes, we found them from two different sites, I think. So we found them from Denisova Cave and a couple of others,
and very little. Sites. I don't think there's any full body things. It started out with just literally a finger, and they've got a little bit. I think they've got some skull information.
I don't know.
So
site.
Very recently,
very mysterious.
Well, I don't know.
Within the sorry, go ahead.
I don't know if this is true or not, but I heard a hypothesis, something that it was the bringing of the. This might be debunked by now, but I heard that the bringing of the Denisovans is what made possible maybe the Tibetans up in the mountain area.
Yeah, so that the gene that allowed their red blood cells to essentially bind to oxygen more efficiently was an introgressive event that we're pretty likely occurred in Denisovans, because since we have full Denisovan genomes and we found that gene in those populations, and it doesn't necessarily coalesce with the non-Tibetan populations genes. I forget which specific gene it is. Yeah, it's extremely likely that it's introgressive.
I just wanted to say we got a troll, Kenny Horner.
Yeah, he's always a troll.
Poor Kenny.
We have their DNA profile, and they are different.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah. Well. Remember, he's paying attention to the Neanderthals.
Oh, sorry. You would have me.
Oh, I'm sorry. He can't even.
Yeah, see, the Neanderthals from the Neanderthal plantation aren't anything at all like the Neanderthals. And once you understand that, and the fact that Kenny is an ignorant boob, this will account for his postings entirely.
Yeah, and also, and from what I remember about Kenny believes the Ica stones are real. He believes the Earth is flat.
All that tripe. Yeah, he's a Hogan follower.
But yeah, and I'm an RJ, and I do remember watching that one live stream that you, Jackson, and Dapper Dino did, Kenny was there, and then he was saying NASA uses vaccines to brainwash people into believing in the
he
birth
haunts, whether he believes anything he says, we don't know, and I don't care. I always take the presumption that everything somebody says is what they actually believe, and if it's gobsmackingly stupid, then they can be rightly criticized for it.
But real fast, back to Noah's Ark and Neanderthals and stuff. Did Neanderthals die before the flood, during the flood, or did they survive after the flood and die after the flood?
Oh, I would have loved to have gotten Williams on that. But I think the argument is that all of the hominids, including the primates, orangutans, and all of this, in the current creation model at Answers in Genesis' museum, all of that's taking place after the flood.
So it's very contentious as to which creationist you ask, how Neanderthals fit into their model and stuff. So someone like Kent Hovind would just say that they're pre-flood people who are just really old, and that accounts for their difference in morphology. And then there's some other people that this is like more of a fringe belief from what I can tell, but some people would claim that they're like the descendants of Cain, so that would be super early in the young Earth timeline.
That's what I think my church is a top teach that.
Yeah, but then I think most of the modern creationist organizations would say that they split off from the mainline humans after the flood, because they mostly accept that the ice ages were after the flood as well. So they kind of have to accept that Neanderthals were
Not
post-flood.
only that, I love it, but Andrew Snelling seriously argues not merely all the fossil mammoths and mastodons and the elephantines are emerging from an original elephant kind aboard the Ark, but that this is literally taking place after the Tower of Babel.
Wait, what? Wait, so they accept all of Proboscidea as a single kind, right?
But hey, guys, sorry to interrupt, but I actually have to head out now. Thank you all.
Oh, yeah, nice meeting you.
Glad to have you here. Catch the debate sometime. Put popcorn in and expect some stupid.
Artwork apparently proves the global flood. Alrighty.
That is some really supercharged evolution happening there. I mean,
and they've been forced into it by their dogmas. They can't avoid it. This has been something that wasn't a problem or wasn't thought about.
Period.
It wasn't thought about back in the Henry Morris era because they didn't think about it an awful lot. They kind of thought there would be enough kinds to go on the Ark, and they didn't really deal with the systematics. But in the modern era, particularly once the baraminologists got on the field after the late 1990s, it was impossible for them to get past the fact that there are so many species, too many to cram onto any Ark. If you look at older material in the early 21st century, they were still talking about 50 to 80,000 kinds, and holy moly, try to put them on the Ark. By the time you get down to the Ark encounter, they recognize they can shoehorn in 1,500 maybe. That they can pull off. So that means they have to lump stuff together to get things down to that 1,500 kinds, which means functionally families and orders. And that means all of the diversification that has to take place after the flood. But they've got a second problem, is because functionally then, because they also have a limited number of kinds during the creation week, all of the fossil record has to be accounted for from those same kinds. So that means they got two bottlenecks to consider. So the only thing they can get by with is unbelievably fast speciation, so fast that any evolutionist would just have conniption fits.
Not only that, but they need animals for the carnivores to eat. So
maybe that's what the 7 extra pairs of clean animals were for. They're for the carnivores.
So RJ, you said Snelling thinks that all Proboscidean diversity, all Proboscidean divergence events happened post Babel.
Yep.
Okay, where is that claim? Because
it's only been put forward the last couple of years. I'm going to be alluding to that in the new book. Because
can you please send me the link for that? Because me and Erica are working on a video covering that topic right now, and this is a new one to me.
Let me see if I can locate that. I've got my reference bibliography up
Okay, because I'm sure she would love to see that. If you're
It's pictures and everything. They got a cute little graphic that shows all these little things popping up after the flood. And I think Joel Duff may have called attention to that too at his natural historian site.
Does Snelling also adhere to the AIG thing where all of Proboscidea is one kind?
To the extent that he thinks about it, probably. From what I've seen of Snelling on baraminology, he basically kind of accepts whatever the other guys do, because remember, he's a geologist, not a biologist.
Wait, so
And so
he claims that all like 60,000 or 60 million years of Proboscidean diversity, from Erytherium to like all of the Plesioelephantiforms, all of the mastodons, all of the elephantids, and all of the other branches like Gomphotheres and Stegodontids, all of that happened from sometime after Babel to before Hannibal crossed the Alps.
yeah,
That's mind-boggling.
yeah. Needless to say, he doesn't go into a lot of details on that.
I wonder why. Oh my gosh.
Oh yeah, they're just digging one hole after another on these things. The double whammy bottleneck of both the paleontology and the thing that we're really going to be making a big deal out of in the new book is this cartoon world of what the paleo world looked like. Theoretically, there has to be a distribution of land in the pre-flood world, and then the flood happens, and then the post-flood world happens. And we've seen an evolution of creationism from the jolly old days of Henry Morris, where they envisaged the pre-flood world as the same as the post-flood world. So they were thinking of the continents distributed the way they are and all of this stuff. They didn't really think too well about the geography thing. As you moved into the plate tectonic era, now they reconfigured, and now they're uncertain as to what the pre-flood world was like. So the usual bit is to think that it's Pangea. That's the popular one in most of the lower level apologetics. But if you look at the Creation Museum, they're talking about Rodinia being the pre-flood world. And then the Pangea supercontinent comes about in a roller coaster of plate tectonics after the flood, and then settles down into the present configuration after that.
So wait a minute. They're saying that Pangea came after Rodinia?
Yes.
Yeah, which would be true, but the point is that they're trying to compress all of that. And
Happened in a year.
the thing
Well,
is
yeah, I mean that's what I'm sorry.
yeah, Rodinia
Kenny,
would be about 800 million years ago, and then Pangea is coalescing around a quarter of a billion years ago.
So what's their reasoning for
I
that?
don't know about the others here, but I don't have a religion, so shove it up your ass.
Yeah, didn't the Rodinia cause the last snowball Earth or something? The snowball Earth.
Yeah, that was in that period, and then there's
Mhm.
it's looking like there were probably earlier supercontinents. Columbia is the one that they've tagged the name to before that. And so we're looking like roughly 500 million to 600 million year cycle for supercontinents. And this is looking at the big picture aspect. And what happens on a mega scale is it depends on whether the supercontinents are forming in one hemisphere versus another. What was unusual about the Pangea supercontinent is it was a pole to pole thing. It was straddling the South Pole at one end and the North Pole at the other, and basically split the planet up and down, with everything else being the world ocean.
Mhm.
And that's
Kenny,
a very different
the
dynamic.
mountaintops used to be under the ocean, you idiot. That's why there's seashells up there.
Yeah, and the fact that there are mountain ranges come and go. So if you were going back, if you went in the Wayback Machine to 300 million years ago, the giant mountain range on the planet would include the Appalachians. And there's some suggestion they may have been even taller than the Himalayas. They've eroded down considerably since and are relatively less tectonically active. But if you want to see relatively recent mountain ranges, you see the ones that are the biggest.
Mhm. So why are they trying to include Rodinia into the whole like
parasitism? They want to sound sciencey. This has been a see. Back
they
when
think
I was
these continental shelves playing bumper cars is scientific.
Pretty much. This is super fast tectonics. This is roller coaster. In fact, I made a joke when I was writing the old tip material, which would have been around 2003, 2004. It was at the time when they were just starting to incorporate plate tectonics into creationist apologetics. So I suggested that all the creationist lawyers, like oh God, I can't think of the one guy's name, but Philip Johnson and the others that are anti-evolutionists, that they should all get together for a class action suit that involved the Harappa culture, by the way, because the Harappa went extinct in India. Their culture died out, and we were discussing that in the debate. But the thing is that because India was originally in the southern hemisphere and crossed the Indian Ocean and slammed into Asia, pushing up Africa. I was suggesting that maybe the creationists could do a class action suit against God to sue on behalf of the Harappas for having the Harappans dying out from whiplash as India slammed into the Asiatic plate.
Well, that's after they had already slammed into like 3 or 4 other places to form Gondwana and Pangaea, right?
Yeah, indeed.
If you're
And
including like Rodinia.
Timmy,
And so what?
because we know it was under the ocean because the mountains are still growing. You idiot. We can measure it.
We know it's under the ocean at some point because it's, one, compositionally basaltic, and two, under the sedimentary layers. But sedimentary layers typically form in ocean deposits.
It's no coincidence that paleontologists went to Pakistan up in the hills to look for the early evidence of whales, because it was taking place in the TTwC, which at the time was beachfront property before India slammed in to push up the giant Tibetan plateau. And that's why they knew where to look. Paleogeography and the history of evolution explains why animals are distributed the way they are, and we can observe the creationists are astonishingly bad at anticipating anything. They have no flood model to accommodate anything. Nobody in the regular paleontology community pays the slightest attention to them. And in fact, in this debate, I made a point of putting up my proviso that I do in all debates now. I tell everybody nothing of what we're going to say makes any difference. It's not going to change any of the data. None of the scientists are paying attention to this debate. None of them are watching this show. None of them are going to alter their viewpoints based upon the stuff that's in there. Just live with it. It's just light entertainment that we're putting up there, and maybe thought-provoking for some people that may want to follow up on it.
Yeah, I actually adopted that for my one debate. I stole your little beginning line because I think it's a very important thing to remind some people. Because some people, I feel like, get so caught up in this internet thing that they forget that there's an entire scientific community doing their own thing.
Exactly. Even for ones that get big audiences, thousands of views, that's a drop in the bucket. And the odds of anyone working in the scientific community watching any of these things, except as a joke, is remote.
Yeah,
they're too busy doing their work.
I forget where I heard this from. Where he said first. Someone said the real scientists are actually doing this stuff. The people talking here are the communicators about science, because the real scientists are too busy do this stuff.
Yeah, once in a while somebody would mistake me for a doctor, and I would point out, nope, I have a BA in history. I am not Dr. Downer. Do not refer to me that. And for one thing, I wish Standing for Truth would stop referring to Kent Hovind as Dr. Hovind. Really, it insults all the people with real doctorates.
Oh,
it's kind of hypocritical because he calls Kent Hovind Dr. Hovind, but he doesn't respect Dapper Dino's doctorate from Ben Hovind University. Instead, he just calls him Diaper Dino.
It's just exactly as solid. No, this is. I have a BA in history. My training is in historical research, which is why sources, the kind of thing that make people's eyes glaze over when they go, "Oh my God, I'm looking for the bibliography." Boring. But that's the meat of things from a scholarly methods direction. And my contention is at that basement level, that's where everybody with bad method crashes and burns. And that's why I tried to drag, kicking and screaming Williams to clarify what his model was, to clarify his documentation, to name names. And it was hilarious to see him not being clear on it so much.
Yeah, I think that was almost the perfect debate for you, because it seemed like more than anybody else I've ever listened to online, he had the least fleshed out argument. Yeah. And he just didn't have any backing empirical evidence. He didn't have any data. He had nothing.
Even Nephilim Free can name drop stuff with greater facility, which is a terrible thing to have to say about somebody.
Yeah, that's the one thing I was back in 2015. I was taking a writing class during my essay portion. They said make sure you list all the sources you do in your description part of that bottom of your essay. That was the very thing. You had to list your sources,
especially if you're making a controversial claim that is evidence-based. But repeatedly, all Williams could say is, "I've got a video," and there's work being done, and I can't tell you anything about it because I would be violating things and I would be sued, or they can't discuss.
The
You
CIA
lost
would
him
kill.
again.
The NSA
Oh,
would
we
kill
lost
me.
RJ again. No, I mean, you know, people probably get tired of me asking them to define things. Well, you have to define things. My training is in psychology, so unless you tell me what definition you are working off of, I have no clue what you're talking about. But
Also, the whole
creationists can't define things.
Yeah.
The whole idea that like you can't talk about things that are currently being researched is just entirely incorrect. Like I'm doing research, I can talk about my research. Like sharing the actual paper is a little bit questionable, but I can talk about what I'm doing. You know what I mean?
They're listening, Walker. The government's listening.
Yeah.
I hope you
Yeah,
have
no.
on the tinfoil hat, you know.
Yeah. Like you could definitely talk about what is the active research, but I mean, even then, even if you weren't, like let's pretend that we live in a completely different world than the world that we live in. You know, there's still you can still use empirical, like RJ was saying, you can still use data from stuff that was published in the past to support your claim. Like if you're making a claim, you should probably bring citations. RJ says he's back in the stream, but if he's saying anything,
Yes,
we
I'm
can't hear him.
theoretically, I was just listening to the discussion. Every once in a while, there would be glitch ups on the connection there.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, at least it's better than your computer laptops. This
one, the laptop is more resilient on that, which is why I've been able to handle things pretty well. It still ain't good enough for StreamYard, that pisser.
Okay, so Kenny wants to know, you weren't there, so you can't know. Yes, we can,
the
Kenny.
rocks
It's
were there.
called science.
The rocks were there, they were there, and we can observe them, and we await Kenny's monograph that persuades anybody in the sciences that he's right. Hee hee, yuck, yuck.
And Kenny, I want to know, well, first of all, you need a citation for that because science can tell us a lot, and you need a citation for why science can't tell us things in the past.
Oh,
okay.
I do have a rebuttal for Kenny's flat Earth argument. I know why the Earth can't be flat because mountains exist. There we go. Case closed.
Yeah, and remember, the creationists had a problem. You don't find this much with modern creationism, but the Henry Morris era, 1970s creationism, had to deal with the fact that the waters covered all the mountains, and Ararat ain't the tallest mountain. It's about the size of Mount Rainier. So in that period, they decided that there weren't many tall mountains, and Ararat at that time was actually the tallest mountain. And that means they were forced to conclude that all the mountains taller than Ararat were pushed up after the flood. Then there was another point that they dealt with. If you flatten the planet down enough so that Mount Ararat is relatively tall, now you have difficulties with gigantic wind systems. The circulation patterns of heat are very different in that kind of an environment. And then, of course, you had the defunct vapor canopy notion, which was a real hot ticket thing in the 60s and 70s creationism, or worse, the ice canopy model that Kent Hovind is kind of riffed off.
I was about to say, Kent still does that.
The Hovind theory, yes, the giant space snowball stuff, which he has never specified. He's always going to be working on that at some point or another. He's dangling in front of us the Hovind theory that nobody in the creationist community does that. The vapor canopy is defunct now, and so they're dealing with an entirely different bit. And for those of you who have heard of Karl Baugh, he was arguing back in the 1970s and 80s that the pre-flood environment had a high-pressure environment. And Kent Hovind still kind of channels some of that. He thinks that somehow or other high oxygen levels are the reason why, or high carbon dioxide levels are the reason why giant bugs existed. No, it was a higher oxygen level, you nitwit. Anyway.
So was the pre-flood the Cambrian period then?
Well, it was everything from the Cambrian through to the Cretaceous is definitely pre-flood flood. And so the pre-flood period is Precambrian. So the Cambrian is starting off virtually everything with critters in it that's preserved as fossils is pretty much regarded as flood, except they get into panics because when you're in the post-KT period and into the Cenozoic, when you've got humans hunting mastodons, now they have the difficulty of trying to ramrod that into the post-flood dispersal, which is why you get Snelling coming up with this idea that all of that's actually taking place after the flood, after Tower of Babel, at roughly a time that other cultures are doing stuff, except we don't agree with that because we don't pay any attention to that. Never mind, please don't ask me what the man behind the curtain is doing.
Yeah, because they never really figure out what when the flood is, because if it's the oxygen, apparently if the oxygen is the big thing in pre-flood, then that was the Carboniferous. That's when the oxygen was the highest.
Yeah, and that spills over into the climate change issue because, by and large, most creationists and anti-evolutionists are climate skeptics. They don't like climate change as well. This fits into the idea that God created everything perfectly and we can't possibly meddle with any of it. We can't change any of it. And by the way, the oil companies need a lot of profit. But you get the system that we actually can trace these factors. One of the things that has popped up, and I've discussed it in other contexts, is the fact that in the period in the Precambrian, the sun's output was less than what it is later. The sun has warmed up a tad. And so what it turns out is that high carbon dioxide levels in the Paleozoic were actually warming up the planet from really cold to less cold. So you were getting things that you could still have glaciation and ice ages with relatively high CO2 levels that are higher than what we're used to now. And it's because the sun was colder and it wasn't pumping in as much energy. Now we're in a completely different environment. And one of the weirdest times, I suppose, is after the Permian mass extinction when oxygen levels dropped to their lowest level in historic times or prehistoric times. It was down to like 15%. So you would have been gaspy at a much lower altitude during the Triassic period. And there's a big, murky muck-up of climate shifts that are going on in that period after the KT before things kind of settle down. And then by the end of the Triassic, you're starting to get the early full dinosaurs, and they just run amok for the next 150 million years.
Well, they just contradicted themselves because you said, RJ, that they say that God created everything perfect and we can't muck anything up, but yet they say everything's been deteriorating.
Oh, yeah. Adam's sinning.
How does that follow?
Yeah, and they get in the same confusion. One of the things that's now an open air debate in creationism is, was there carnivory before the flood? If you had asked, if you had asked creationists back in the 1970s, they would have been almost universally insistent there was no tooth and claw. All dinosaurs were vegetarians. All of that's the case, and you still find that in the apologetics of Ken Ham and Kent Hovind and all the rest. But
all the watermelon
if you read
Tyrannosauruses.
If you read the fine print in current creationist apologetics, including stuff over in the Jensen category, they pretty well come to accept that there is in fact predation in the fossil record. And since the fossil record is pre-flood, ergo, there has got to be predation going on in there. And the fact is, another thing, in addition to airborne volcanic ash that I've been collecting over the years, I also pay close attention to the technical papers that relate to predation in the fossil record, of which there is quite a lot. The aquatic ape theory confirmed. Yeah, dog paddling bonzo. That one never quite panned out. It had its little flash in the pan thing. It was based on very circumstantial evidence and was generally regarded as a wacky theory back in the 1970s, and today is regarded as very wacky. I'll have to look up what that paper was from Snelling. It's not, the topic of it isn't about mastodons. It's something else relating to post-flood continental distribution and defining boundaries or something like that. And I got to check up which one it is. But there's a pretty little graphic in there which objectively shows all of that taking place after Babel on a timeline, and virtually no footnotes. And the same thing too with you look, and I know Joe Duff has done a piece at Naturalist Historian on the fact that the revision, and Betsy Gibbon did a show on it, the fact that the museum showing human origins in apes plainly has all of those ape lineage occurring after the flood.
Yep. Yeah, they have all of the ape lineages sharing common descent and coming after the flood. And I think they even include paranthropines into the ape lineages instead of having paranthropines as their own lineage, which is a
ironically,
it's a weird choice to say the least.
That speciation is particularly slow, and the fun thing that I think is a fun fact is that the orangutans, current extant species of orangutans, are speciating at around the same time as our species is speciating down in Africa, 200,000 or 300,000 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
In completely different spots of the world and all of that. And the thing is that you got to feel sorry for creationists, because the fields are advancing so fast that the data is sprinting so far ahead of their worldview that they're never going to catch up.
I do not feel sorry for creationists one bit, because they stick their heads in the sand and don't look at the science.
See,
it's right to be annoyed with them, but I can understand their chagrin. Paleogenomics in particular is a field that is burgeoning so quickly, where they are reconstructing ancient evolutionary processes, reconstructing ancient molecules, working out the genetics of how dinosaur snouts turn into beaks with birds at the experimental level. And creationists barely tiptoe into that stuff. And that stuff is happening. The same thing is going on in geology, where there's just a revolution afoot. Nick Zenter calls attention to it. They can image deep earth, and they're finding the remnants of ancient plate movements in all of their subducted zones that squish together like that Christmas candy that looks like little wiggly stuff. That's what plates do when they hit the deep mantle. And that stuff is being imaged now in a way that was impossible 5 years ago, and that is allowing them to reconstruct plate movements that were taking place 300 million years ago.
Yeah, my hypothesis proves why Ariel could have kids of Eric and the Little Mermaid, because the speciation event only happened 4,000 years ago, mermaids and humans.
There we go. You got to think big biblically. It won't lead you to any sense, but at least it will allow you to explain everything. And if worse, you can just say "cuz."
Cause my book. I got a book and I don't need anything else.
Yeah, I'll love to see
I'm being hyperbolic here.
Yeah, of course.
William said he would. I gave him my address. William sort of said he would be sending me a copy of his book. And
I really hope he follows through on that.
Yeah, and I would be delighted if he signs it. But at any rate, I would like to see it, because unless I can observe the claims being made and the sources he's offering for them, and then compare that against the data field, he at least has a bibliography, or at least references. I don't know whether he actually compiles a bibliography, but we do know he's got a reference listing at the back of the book, because he's flashed it at us. But I can't see it anywhere, and so that means all of it, I got to just take his word for it. Well, if he's just as bad at scholarship as Andrew Snelling is, who he disparages as a young Earth creationist, then it ain't going to come off very well.
All right. Well, I probably need to get going, y'all. But it was nice talking to you. And like I said, I think you and Jordan did very well in that debate.
Yeah. So Walker, Jordan was very well prepared on that aspect of it. So all I needed to do was just flesh out part of the side bits. I already had the links available, so I could put the one to Andrew Snelling's criticism of it, because that's really the biggest one. Up there, so that anybody in the live feed could have seen it.
So
fire breathing Parasaurolophus.
So Walker, before you go, you want to talk about? You want to advertise on your channel coming up, or nothing?
Oh, actually, I will be having a video come out before May 13th, so within 2 weeks, less than 2 weeks. So that'll be cool.
Why, you little scamp! What's it on?
It's actually on Neanderthal paleogenomics.
Yeah. That's a whole area. The whole issue about how not merely human beings and not merely animals, but all the food crops. Why the hell are the food crops of the Americas so distinctive? And how can, and what did nobody there coming off of the ark look at an ear of corn and decide, hey, I think we should keep that for food? Or nobody there had a bag of rice that they decided to carry with them to Terra del Fuego. This is just ludicrous as to why that stuff doesn't match up. And as far as I can tell, creationists have paid zero attention to this problem. If anybody knows of any creationists that's tried to deal with that food crop specialization in post-flood distribution, let me know.
Yeah, my video is not actually going to be like necessarily anti-creationist or anything. It's just going to be about the science because I think it's cool.
Well, if you're just gonna
paleogenetics.
do science, what's the point, Walking Fish? What are you gonna do? Try to
Exactly,
educate people,
yeah.
inform them?
Well, anyways, yeah. Good night, y'all. I'll see y'all around.
Yeah. Take
Night.
care.
Yeah, well, actually, I do two kinds of videos. One in which I make fun of creationists, and the other I try to educate people. But yeah, I mean, it's like, what are you going to do with the Kinneys of the world or the Kent Hovens of the world? They don't want to be educated.
Yeah, and if you look historically at how anti-evolutionists proceed, other than grassroots people, there's a whole pile up of ex-creationists at the grassroots level. Lamont and Erica and Eric. There's so many people that were raised in that kind of environment. I didn't come from that circumstance. But if you look at the higher level anti-evolutionists that really committed themselves to it doctrinally, very few ever change their mind on this. They stay that position petrified down to their dying day. And that's been true from the 1870s all the way down to the present. So don't expect any epiphanies to come from anybody that is enough of a creationist as to do videos and write books and get stuff published at AIG, which, by the way, doesn't include Philip Williams. Philip Williams and I both have not been published at AIG.
Well, I used to be a young earther, and I was lied to, and I am so mad that I was lied to for so long, and that's basically why I have my channel.
Yeah,
You know,
that's a common thread of people that feel that it's a psychological trouble to the fact that people they were trusting in to present things that were valid were bullshitting to them. And whether the bullshitter believed the bullshitting or whether or not they were doing so for some other motivation, the still point is you got cheated out of all that wonderful knowledge. The thing now is, because we're in the internet era and the accessibility of technical literature, direct bold text stuff is so rampant that it's much harder to hide behind that ignorance veil because we can look it up.
RJ, I've got a question for you. It's an opinion question.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think we're ever going to get rid of this young earther bullshit?
Oh, probably not any more than there will always be a blob of people. Look at the fact that we have flat earthers. I mean, if anything makes young earth creationism look like rocket science, it's flat earth. And yet you find a small proportion of people, a few percent, that believe in flat earth. And so what we're talking about is there are certain kinds of mindsets. Dinosaurs could breathe fire. We have the bombardier beetle as proof. We're going to be discussing that issue as well in the Rocks Were There Volume 2, Kenny. I'm sure you'll be thrilled to know about the fact that even Dwayne Gish's argument on that was claptrap that he was putting in the 1990s, and the bombardier beetle also does not prove that. There's been some really marvelous technical literature on bombardier beetle evolution and all that, which by and large is not discussed in the creationist literature. That's more of that data suppression stuff. But the kind of mindset like Kenny or Kent Hovind or Standing for Truth, who can be immersed in this sort of stuff and they believe it sincerely, firmly, but they never fact check it. And it's because they have an object of desire they want to be true. It's something that they need to be true, and they're going to look at only the parts that reinforce it. And so long as you have minds that can do that, you're going to have younger creationists, you're going to have people who think the Earth is flat. You're going to have people that think that somebody other than Shakespeare wrote Shakespeare's plays. You're going to find some people that think the Titanic didn't sink. It was the Olympic and they were switched at launch. I mean, there's always going to be some nutballs that will believe some kind of conspiratorial claptrap, which, by the way, will be the third book that Jackson and I will be doing down the pike on conspiracy thinking, and we're going into the mindset of all of that and the connections that has between teleological thinking and creationist mindsets. There's been some literature on that subject. So, we've got an awful lot of things, and the old RJ is going to stay a real busy little beaver so long as I can.
Is there going to be a Rocks 3?
Probably not. The Rocks 2 should take care of the other half of the book that we had planned. It's going to be just as big as Rocks 1, and it will cover lots of material. There'll be virtually all a fresh batch of material on geology, human evolution, the whole Darwin was racist trope, the origin of vertebrates, tetrapods. There's a slew of material that was alluded to as upcoming attractions for the remainder of the book that will now all be in volume 2. So it's going to be.
Have you got any illustrators for your Rock for Their Children's edition and get to my niece?
Holy moly! That one actually is an intriguing little project to do. No, we haven't found an illustrator on that one. It would require a big, needless to say, data-heavy footnote stuff is not what you do for a children's book. So what you would have is, in effect, a summary of the basic points that we want to bring up not only the physical details of what we're doing, but the methods point. And that to remind for the child that this methods thing is a thing you do from the get-go. Kids are naturally extremely curious. And if you imbibe them in a skeptical but not hyper-skeptical mode, where they don't take your word for it and they look into it and try to build up what their model is and all the rest, you can learn the principles of that even quite young, and you don't want to have it banged out of you by the educational system. Some people don't really get into the swing of it until way late, because I didn't really have that kind of methods direction approach in most of my education, and I really kind of developed it when I hit college, because I bumped into scholarship at that level where it doesn't matter what you think, can you prove it, that you got to pay attention to all the source material, you never misrepresent source material, and those things really, I only gained those skills full bore in college, and that's too long to wait.
Yeah, creationists try to get them while they're young, so why shouldn't we?
Yeah. Plus, it's fun. The real science and the real excitement of investigation and scholarship is so wonderful because it has the advantage of being true and solid, and it's invigorating, and it leads to new discoveries. And anybody that can go through the world of things that we've discovered, they've seen on my show, I have no shortage of enthusiasm about these things because it's just neat shit. And the creationist stuff is cute. It's got its cartoons, it's got its glossy publications, but it's boringly uninteresting and unproductive. It never gets anywhere. It just wheel spins. And life is too short for wheel spinning.
Yeah.
So I think we've killed everything that we could. We should have a whole bloody show about fire-breathing dinosaurs, Kenny, and all the rest. That's a whole separate topic.
Yeah. So, what you, Lisa? Before we go, you have anything to advertise on your channel?
Go ahead,
It's
Lisa.
Lisa for Truth. I do mainly religion videos, but I do some science videos. I also do historical videos. Right now I'm working on a series about the Connecticut witch trials, which most people have never heard of. I never heard of it.
Salem gets all the press. When were those? When were those?
What, the Connecticut trials?
Yeah.
Before Salem, in the 1600s. And they were actually bigger than Salem. And it's not that people tried covering it up. I found this out when I was researching it. The courthouse burned down. So they had to painstakingly piece these witchcraft trials together from things like Bibles and stuff like that.
And so was this like a few decades before Salem or just right before it?
No, um this was around the 1660s.
Hmm.
Oh, that's kind of
It'll be
funny.
interesting to look into that as to what extent did that climate of knowing about the witchcraft infestation in nearby Connecticut lead to that mindset being more plausible by the ones going on at Salem.
But isn't that kind of funny, though? Connecticut, since wasn't Connecticut created because they thought Massachusetts was too strict?
That could very well be. We know that the persecution of heretics in general, and witches as well, tends to correlate with periods of stress. So if they've had plagues or droughts or wars and things, that's when the cultures tend to start looking for scapegoats. And so I'll be intrigued to look into that and look at the larger context of it and find what scholarly work has been done on that. Thank you for bringing that up, Lisa. That's a neat little side topic.
Yeah, like I said, I was gonna just do Salem and go back from Salem and then go to Europe, but and go from the most recent to across the pond to Europe, but then
Yeah, Scotland. I think the last witch killing there was, I think, in the 1730s.
What, in Europe?
In Scotland, I think was the last one in Europe. I think it was in Scotland in the 1730s, if memory serves me. The earliest is actually
England actually England actually hanged their last witch in the 1900s.
Oh wow, I got to look into that.
Yeah.
Didn't they accuse Joan of Arc of being a witch?
Oh yeah, well, and that of course related to politics, where she's if you're going to argue that she's on the side of God, that's going to make it kind of awkward to fight them. So the only argument would be, well, no, it's not God. She's actually with the devil, and that was the case. And I'm not entirely sure that the Church of England has ever apologized, although they weren't the ones to do it. It was the English Catholics. But they tend to just play the she's a saint because they made her a saint. But that one is intriguing for the whole psychology of magical belief during that period. This was a long-standing war that was going on, the 100 Years' War, between England or the French-speaking rulers of England wanting to gain control of the French-speaking parts of France. And so the Plantagenets thought of themselves as essentially mainland French people who had a set of provinces in England that they also controlled. And it was quite a bit later, by the time you get down to the Tudors, that they start really kind of thinking of themselves as just British. And Henry VIII, I think, and Elizabeth were about the last ones that could lay any claim to any real estate in France. They just gave it up at that point and decided to just be British.
So anyway, I'm gonna head out. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, we've gone a good 2 hours on this, which is about the size of the debate.
Yeah, and I got kind of my channel is still editing my video about time traveling video game Steins Gate, so I'm trying to get that edited out. And then as soon as I get Jackson's schedule, that hopefully me, Jackson, RJ are going to do a podcast about selection, natural, sexual, and artificial.
Which is a tough fun and games area where it'll be moving across lots of different topic areas.
Yep. But until then, never stop learning and enjoy the randomness. We'll catch you all next time. Bye.
Bye.